I wanted to give everyone a reminder that this meeting will be recorded, but good afternoon and welcome to the November 8th Impacts Grant Review Committee meeting. My name is Casey Beck, and I am a program analyst here at the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission. Today, I will be presenting several updates on the Impacts Grant, as well as we have some folks here that will be presenting on a recently published report from the Waddell Research Group, and later we will discuss unallocated grant funds. So today's anticipated meeting schedule is shown here, but before we take roll, I'd like to take a moment to welcome a few new members to this Impacts Grant Review Committee. First, we have Liz Weber, who is joining us from Oregon Housing and Community Services as Director Bell's designee for this committee. Liz, do you mind saying hello and introducing yourself?
Hi, nice to see you, everyone. My name is Liz Weber. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a health and housing policy analyst with Oregon Community Housing and Community Services. Before I joined OHCS about 2 months ago, I spent 17 years in a community-based nonprofit organization working with houseless folks.
Fantastic, thank you. And it looks like we do have Ken now joining us, so thank you for the heads up, Ken. Liz, we are so excited that you are here and have joined us. We also have 2 members awaiting official appointments from the governor, but present today is Chief Deputy District Attorney Steve Gunnels from the Deschutes County DA's office. And joining us soon will be Police Chief Marcia Herndon of the Albany Police Department in Lynn County. Steve, I did see you pop on here earlier. If you are around, do you mind taking a moment to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. Hi, I'm Steve Gunnels. I'm with the Deschutes County DA's office. I'm a chief deputy. I've been with the office for about 28 years, and I'm the DA-elect in Deschutes County. So I'm actually looking forward to being on this committee a great deal. We have a lot of innovative programs in Deschutes County, and we're looking to spread that around the state and to different entities around the state, and I'd like to be part of that.
Fantastic. We're happy to have you on board. And last but certainly not least, we have a new team member joining us from the CJC. William Houchin joined the CJC in September as a research analyst, and we are thrilled to announce that he's going to be joining us on Impacts. Will, would you please take a moment to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is William Ash Houchin. As you know, you can call me Will. I've been with the CJC since the middle of September. And before that, I served for 4 years as an assistant professor of criminal justice. I'm originally from Texas, and that was where my last academic appointment was.
Thanks so much, Will. All right, and a quick reminder to everyone, please have yourselves on mute unless you are speaking. I've seen a little bit of feedback come through along with Will's introduction there. I also was notified that my PowerPoint got disconnected, so apologies as I get that started back up here. Okay, hopefully it's up now. Awesome. So now you should see our anticipated meeting schedule for today. And we will pause real quick and take roll. So let's see here. Steve Allen, I don't believe you were here. He did have a meeting conflict, but if you are, please say so. Okay. Ken Santagren.
Present.
Jeremiah Stromberg.
I'm here.
Judge Shanti.
Present.
Liz Weber.
Present.
And I guess a quick side note to Steve Gunnels, this is normally where I would ask you to say that you are present, but we are waiting on that appointment. So you're just here to see how we're operating. But moving along, Eric Swallow. Right, Commissioner Hall.
Present.
Thank you, Claire. Alicia Beamer,
Present.
Stacy Brubaker,
Present.
and I got notice that Dr. Brigham will be about a half hour late to this meeting, so we'll keep an eye out for him to join. Sheriff Landers, I saw you pop on here earlier.
Present.
Fantastic. Dr. Stanfill. See you there. Looks like Dr. Stanfield's having a couple of technical difficulties. We can't hear your audio, but I do see you, and I'm counting you present. Senator Gelser-Blumen. Jeannie Gullickson. RJ Navarro.
Present.
Thanks, RJ. Garen Riddle.
Present.
Thanks, Darren. Fantastic. Well, for what it's worth, we definitely have quorum, and let's kick this off. I have a couple of things of housekeeping I'm hoping to take care of. Then we will hear some highlights from the Waddell Research Group on their report. And will present some updates on grantee quarterly reporting. And then later we'll get into a discussion regarding the unallocated funding, the feedback we receive from grantees, as well as next steps. And there will be time for public comment later, but in the interest of time, we'll hop onto it. All right. So today is actually our last scheduled quarterly meeting for this year. As we look ahead at 2023, we propose a similar quarterly meeting schedule. Meetings will take place on the second Tuesday of the middle month of every quarter at the same afternoon time slot, 1 to 3 p.m. So as you'll see on the calendar on the left, the proposed meeting dates are highlighted in yellow there. And the proposed meeting dates are Tuesday, February 14th, Tuesday, May 9th, Tuesday, August 8th, and Tuesday, November 14th. This cadence will allow for grant staff to keep the GRC apprised of quarterly reporting from grantees, the opportunity to review any agreement amendment requests we receive from grantees, provide necessary updates, and it's also noteworthy to say that more meetings may be scheduled should a business need arise. But if that becomes necessary, CJC staff will reach out to GRC members directly to gauge their availability. And as a reminder, we just kicked off this current grant cycle. So 2023 is more of a, I don't want to say maintenance phase, but implementation continues. There's no development of a new RFGP. There won't be any new applications to review. So this quarterly meeting cadence, I think, is very appropriate. Is there any discussion from the GRC? We don't need a formal vote on this or anything, but just wanted to lay it out there if anyone had a burning comment they wish to make. Right. So we will get those Teams meetings set up. Maybe there might be a hybrid thing towards the end of next year in the sense that we could possibly meet in person. But for now, things will remain virtual, and these will be Microsoft Teams meetings, and grant review committee members, you'll receive those 4 invites soon. I also wanted to, oh, hey, Janie.
Sorry, I'm late and making noise. Sorry for the interruption.
No worries at all. Happy to have you here. All right, so wanted to provide a quick update on the legislative report for impacts. It is due to the legislature on January 1st of 2023, and wanted to also comment that a cost avoidance analysis is due every odd numbered year that was outlined in Senate Bill 973. For the 2023 report, we are prepared to include some baseline analysis, but I mean, of note, our research partners at OHSU Center for Health Systems Effectiveness are currently working to connect with statewide administrative data sources. So it's not going to be incredibly robust, but we anticipate that access to that data will allow for deeper analysis in the future. A final draft of that legislature report will be shared with GRC members via email in mid-December is what we're shooting for, hopefully December 15th. That sounds like a great round number. And at that time, you'll have an opportunity to comment, and we will hope to submit that report before the holidays kick in, probably about a week or so later. Also wanted to provide a quick update on the 2023 legislative session and what's happening with that. It's just around the corner. So the CDC has requested $20 million in continued impacts grant funding as part of a policy option package, or a POP, within the agency's biennial budget bill. So for those who are not as familiar with legislature, a POP is not a bill itself, but rather a component of the agency's biennial budget bill. And it will be considered by the Ways and Means Committee and the Public Safety Committee, Subcommittee of Ways and Means, as part of the CDC's overall budget proposal. And I think it's noteworthy to say that these funds have always been other fund. So that's a legislative designation that allows more flexibility in spending money across biennia to accommodate a pilot style program like Impacts. It's significant because it means that we're not tied to the lines of the biennium, the June 30th deadline to get money out to grantees. We have a lot more flexibility as we can continue to carry that over and roll it out as we see necessary. And just to elaborate a bit more on the CDC's request, it's really aimed at bolstering existing programs as well as providing opportunity for other programs or other jurisdictions to pilot something locally. Great. Well, over the summer, some of you may have been aware of the Waddell Research Group, which are our research partners at the OHSU PSU School of Public Health. They completed qualitative interviews with our original 11 Impacts grantees, the ones from the first 2020 to 2022 grant cycle, and they recently published a report. So we have a few members of the Waddell Research Group here today to present their findings. And I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen so that Sarah or someone from the Waddell Research Group can take over. Fantastic. I can see the presentation, Sarah. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Casey. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Rayner. I'm a senior research associate on Dr. Waddell's team at the OHSU PSU School of Public Health. A few other colleagues are on the line today as well, Dr. Waddell, Katie Lenahan, and Rose Gorin. And we are the team working alongside CJC and the grantees providing local evaluation and technical assistance. So we're super excited to join this meeting today and share some results from qualitative interviews. The interviews focused on Impacts grantee perspectives on program implementation from the first 2 years of the program, 2020 through 2022. And these interviews are really a first step for us to orient to the work that's happening on the ground. And it's going to be used to inform the next steps for our team, providing local evaluation and technical assistance. So I want to start out by just saying that we framed this presentation by we're first going to share some context around the unprecedented challenges that grantees face due to COVID-19 right at the outset of their projects in 2020, and then also in response to Oregon Measure 110, the Drug Decriminalization and Treatment Act. These contextual factors changed and continue to change the ways in which grantees find and engage with the Impacts target population. And from there, we're going to share about the needed and critical services that the grantees are providing. We're going to touch on some similarities across sites, features that support successful program implementation, and we'll also share about the barriers that grantees are experiencing to program implementation and a little bit of information about how grantees are tracking outcomes and some next steps needed to quantify the effects the Impacts program is having at the local level. So our methods, we interviewed the 11 grantees from that initial grant cycle. Our interviews were completed between May 25th and June 22nd of 2022. We went through a transcription process, so all of the interviews were transcribed, analyzed, and we reviewed for common themes and common features. The following slides will be organized to describe program eligibility, program services, program implementation, and tracking outcomes. You all should have also received a copy of the full report. So please feel free to pull that up, and we will open the line up for questions at the end of this presentation. At the same time, if anything comes up as we're going through, feel free to type into the chat. I can't actually see the presentation and the chat at the same time, so I'll ask my team to keep an eye on that and monitor and just chime in if anything pops up in the chat. Okay, so starting with a focus on program eligibility. As previously stated, grantees faced significant challenges at the outset of implementation in response to COVID-19 and Oregon Measure 110. One grantee noted, when impacts first started, the goal was 4 or more jail bookings in a year, and it had a hard number to it. But then COVID happened and the jails weren't taking everybody. So super important to just emphasize that strategies to engage with the target population through public safety and through jail encounters changed, and that continues to change. Another grantee comment here highlights the challenges faced after the rollout of Oregon Measure 110. This grantee said, when we applied for impacts, we didn't have Measure 110 in place. So a lot of the low-level crimes or the social crimes that we were going to address would be drug offenses, low-level possession charges, things like that. When Measure 110 went into place, that reduced our ability to encounter those kinds of clients based on those kinds of contacts. So contacts with law enforcement for possession of controlled substances, in most cases, were not being documented, and there were no jail bookings for only possession of controlled substance. The target population for impacts remains the same. However, due to these unprecedented factors, grantees were less able to connect with the target population and document eligibility in the way that they had expected to when they first proposed their projects in 2019. We saw decreased jail capacity, no bookings for possession, fewer documented law enforcement contacts, and emergency room overcrowding. And these are all key contextual challenges to keep in mind as we share the findings of these qualitative interviews. So kind of quoting my colleague Katie yesterday, she was saying, in some ways, we've been using old metrics in a new world. The target population is still out there, but the way that they're showing up in the data is different. And in many cases, folks have been much harder to find. Grantees value flexibility in order to minimize administrative barriers to enrollment. This grantee comment here emphasizes positive partnerships for referrals. This grantee noted that 90% of the time, clients have had 3 or more police contacts, but when a police officer calls me with a referral to the Impacts project, I don't ask if they've had 3 contacts or more. One of the reasons why I don't is because of the fact that I want the police to call me. I feel like if we say no one time, they won't call us the next time. Some comments from grantees about eligibility suggest a gap in understanding of the target population definition as it relates to eligibility for impact services. To emphasize that, one grantee noted, we were doing a lot of work with folks who could be considered target population members, but hadn't been identified that way. And we had seen huge successes with some of these people, and none of that data was going to CJC or anywhere else. This came up among many grantees, actually, who feel that they aren't able to capture the full breadth of their activities. Despite changes and despite challenges around program eligibility, grantees have been able to provide needed services in their communities. This table here shows the number of times that different service types were referenced during interviews. The most frequent referenced type of service was case management, which we broadly defined as grantees providing services or systems navigation support to help individuals remain in the community and link with other community-based resources for stabilization. Another very frequently referenced service was basic needs, being able to help individuals link up with bus passes, clothing, hygiene and camping supplies, transportation to appointments, or transportation immediately upon reentering the community from an institution, and other sorts of systems navigation, such as enrolling in the Oregon Health Plan or obtaining an identification. So a lot of really important services are being provided from the grantees that we want to highlight and emphasize. Several common features were highlighted across sites that are supporting engagement with community members. First and foremost, trust and rapport built by the impact staff plays a critical role in influencing engagement with services. Things like staff attitudes, personalities, individual characteristics, such as being gentle, but having a structured approach, being able to address those basic needs, and continuously showing up for a person without judgment or negative repercussion. This comment here says, helping somebody just get those basic needs met really goes a long way to building rapport and trust. And I think that's what keeps people coming back to us. Grantees emphasize the importance of time and place when connecting with clients, having flexible availability of staff, and that the timing of an intervention or the point of connection matters. Meeting people where they're at physically, whether it's in the jail, emergency department, at a court arraignment, in the community, and providing those transportation services as well. And partnerships came up time and time again. Partnerships across multiple sectors played a critical role for grantees to create integrated and collaborative approaches to care. And this comment here, one grantee said it's been really effective having staff located directly at the jail because they're able to see people directly cell side and even at intake. Meeting clients where they are has allowed for a truly client-driven process, as this grantee commented. It's really helpful that there are very few restrictions on a participant's compliance with the program. They don't have to be open with mental health. They don't have to be open with substance use treatment. We can identify exactly where they're at and really focus on what their goals are and what they identify as their barriers. And then we work to reduce those. It truly is client-driven. Culturally specific and family-centered services were also brought up as common approaches to connect with the target population, specifically among tribal grantees. Tribal grantees mentioned word of mouth as a primary mechanism for connecting with the target population and receiving referrals to their services. Tribal grantees shared stories of working with families, focusing efforts on holding family together and teaching and sharing cultural values. And this quote shows, one grantee said, "We really use family support. We've called on family, we've called on our cultural department to come out and do blessings with people in their own homes." Grantees expressed a desire to expand the scope of impacts to include greater focus on prevention services. Several grantees noted that there's a need in their communities to work with clients prior to having multiple encounters with law enforcement. This is a very poignant quote. We also need a prevention component to it, or else we're just at the river pulling bodies out and trying to resuscitate each one at a time. We're not up the river, like closing up the gates and figuring out where they're getting in. Grantees grantees noted that clarification is needed on allowable impact services and a clearer roadmap regarding programmatic expectations and what their options might be for expanding the scope of services. Grantee comments also highlighted some challenges and contextual issues that are impacting their ability to work with the target population. Lack of housing, especially for those with a criminal background, came up across the board. This grantee noted, "We need somewhere to put folks. We have a lot of people and we can catch them at these moments where they're really ready to start the change process. But housing is such a barrier in our area, and that sometimes the only thing that we can offer them is a tent and a sleeping bag because it takes months and months and months under the best of circumstances for people to find housing. Staffing limitations were raised due to hiring challenges, as well as the need for larger teams or co-located services where they don't currently exist. Substance use inhibiting an individual's ability to receive needed and desired services was also mentioned. Tribal grantees discussed some unique challenges, including working within large service areas that required navigation across and within complex jurisdictions. For some, challenges persisted around relationship building with county criminal justice systems. Grantees noted that it was difficult to find tribal members when they were in non-tribal criminal justice systems. One grantee said, if anything could be changed, it would probably be the process of being able to find our members. We have 6 counties, so that's really big. It's really difficult. Issues of generational trauma and racism were noted as factors exacerbating the difficulty of identifying and engaging with the target population. One grantee noted, we have a high number of Native people incarcerated in our surrounding area. They seem to serve more time than non-natives. County has a history of racism within their judicial system. I think that's why they didn't want to work with us. I think that's why they didn't want us to know the data. So the final area of findings that we'd like to share with you all today is around tracking outcomes. This figure shows what level of information grantees indicate that they have access to about enrolled clients, which is the darker purple bar, and eligible clients, which is the lighter color purple. So to just walk through what we're looking at here in this figure, 10 grantees noted the use of jail booking information for enrolled clients or those who they're actively working with through impacts, and 8 grantees were using jail booking information among eligible clients, so folks who are potentially going to be enrolled into impact services. 8 grantees noted accessing information about law enforcement contacts. Law enforcement contact had a variable definition across sites, which I wanted to note. And 7 were able to do that with eligible clients. Information about emergency department visits was less accessible, with only 5 grantees reporting the ability to access and track emergency department visits. And Oregon State Hospital admission data was only readily available for 1 grantee. Considering how targeted this focus of the impacts program is, we would really hope and expect to see access across the board for all of this information. However, this information can be pretty complicated to collect and track and get set up. Some local activities were difficult to measure or not captured through current reporting processes. When grantees were reflecting on how key outcomes could be tracked and measured, they shared several very creative ideas that could be useful to monitor and consider, such as time saved through diversion activities, tracking more robust details of the activities that are being provided and the services being provided, the quality of the services being provided, or outreach work that's done with individuals who do not end up enrolled into the impacts program. Grantees expressed a desire to report on individualized site-specific outcomes, noting how differences in project implementation across grantee sites makes it challenging to assess outcomes. I really like this figure, so I'm excited to share this with everyone. Reflecting on what success looks like for impacts clients, grantees described the progress that they were seeing, noting very specifically that success is highly individualized and across a continuum of engagement and readiness for change. So what this figure shows is how grantees described client successes across a continuum, starting at the top with a willingness to engage with services. A willingness to engage, this quote supporting that says, success is if someone is willing to come to us, if they're willing to even talk to us. And moving clockwise to showing up to engage, success is having them come back 3 days in a row. even come one day. One grantee comment that highlights maintaining engagement. Now they're heavily engaged in services and groups. And then there's short-term stability, which this grantee commented they haven't been to the hospital in months, or more long-term stability. They have 15 months sober. They're doing amazing things. There are opportunities to develop locally relevant metrics that align with this continuum of engagement and tracking, such as tracking retention in services. That's something that could be a hard outcome that is tracked at grantee sites, time out of the hospital, or shifting away from jail stays towards court filings. Grantees emphasize the importance of focusing on incremental progress towards stability. Grantees noted that success was much more than the ultimate goals of long-term stability. Each step forward should be celebrated. One grantee said, "I'm worried that we'll get too set on believing that success is that they're sober, that they have a home, they have a job, they're fully functional, they might have their kids back, because that's so far out on the horizon." Each one of these individuals has a long way to go to reach that. So I think success has to be measured in really small amounts as we go through. So really high level summary here of all the information that was shared, both in the full report and then quickly through this presentation. Some grantees are having difficulty tracking impacts data outcomes. The target population has not changed, but we need to update the metrics. Grantees are providing critical services and need mechanisms to document the reach of those services. And grantees see opportunities for expanding the scope of services to better serve the target population. We did want to highlight that our group really used these qualitative interviews as a first step to understand the groundwork and some more context, rich context and grantee experiences. But in the coming months, our local evaluation and technical assistance team at the OHSU PSU School of Public Health, we plan to work with grantees to develop appropriate outcome metrics. We also have some plans and actually an upcoming best practices webinar bringing grantees together, but just opportunities to convene grantees for interagency learning, troubleshooting, overcoming local barriers to data collection and reporting. Okay, that was a lot of information. I wanted to just take pause because I know that oftentimes grantees tune into these calls. So I wanted to just pause and make some space for any grantees who are on the line who have thoughts or input or local context that they might want to provide. And we can also open it up for questions from the full group as well.
I see a hand up from Alicia Bamer. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Oh, yes, Alicia Beamer. Thank you.
Bamer, sorry.
It's okay. I really enjoyed this presentation. Thank you so much. I'm wondering, Sarah, on the I'm wondering how we can enhance the data collection, because part of the work that we did was creating MOUs so that the grantees could receive this information. And I know even we're having, from a hospital perspective, we'd love to be able to partner with the FIT team, which was a grantee here in Lane County. And we have a lot of data of the emergency frequent utilizers of our emergency department. We know that they're interfacing with law enforcement and the jails as well, but how to really put all of that data together and also protect the privacy of the individuals. And I think that's something I can say that I know our county is struggling with, and wondering how this work will support those efforts.
Yeah, so we, through this process, have been able to get really helpful information about site by site which grantees have access to what types of data, as well as specific barriers that they're experiencing, whether it's around relationship building, maybe some HIPAA concerns. So we're really excited to be able to work individually with the grantees to create additional reporting. So CJC has standardized reporting for the grantees, but something supplemental where we can really look at hopefully participant level information that meets the capacity of each grantee, because depending on the counties, depending on those relationships that exist, depending on what type of organization is hosting this impacts program, there's very differential access to those types of information.
Yeah, and I imagine part of it's manual pull or potentially, or however they're reaching out to folks to get that. And then I guess just the other question is, it sounds like we're going to be requesting additional funding for impacts grant funding, right? The $20 million, but is, there is a savings as well. If you have, I have 3 patients that we've been working with the county on who visit between the 3 of them 55 times to our emergency department a month. So there's a savings there. I don't know how, if the impacts grant, as they're going for funding, how they're also speaking to that. If anybody knows, but I think that's why getting this data is so important, right? For ongoing sustainability and more importantly, the quality of the life of the people we're serving, but.
And I'll jump in right there, Alicia. I think that what you identified is key, especially going into an uncertain budget environment. Being able to communicate these savings is very important. In 973, one of the tasks that is given to CJC and this group kind of jointly every 2 years is to do a cost avoidance report. It's something that I think for all the factors that were identified by Sarah as being kind of challenges to collecting data, the lack of comparability across programs, and then just everything she mentioned, that's making that process difficult. We're working on that now, but certainly I think it's going to be a little bit more of a one-by-one reach out to hear stories like the one that you just mentioned about the folks that we're kind of diverting out of their expensive pasts. And so that's what we need to work on. And I think that's going to be very important as we go and do this messaging going forward. So I appreciate you mentioning that. And don't be surprised if you hear from Casey and the team to talk about some of those folks in the very near future.
To, honestly.
Yeah.
So yeah, any way I can help for sure.
Sure.
Thank you.
So I see a comment in the chat. Douglas County Umpqua Health Alliance is being able to track outcomes using Tableau software. And it's been amazing software to get outcome data for cohorts. So Alan, I don't know if you wanted to unmute, if you're able to talk a little bit about that now. I don't want to put you on the spot.
Well, I don't work for Umpqua Health Alliance, but they've done a presentation and the software is really amazing at what it can pull up. They're able to see reductions in emergency department, reductions in jail time, or they can also see the reverse, these cohorts are in the jail this many times. This is how much it's costing. This is how much it costs in ER. And there's a lot of different data that they're collecting. And it seems pretty user friendly to pull up different data sets. But we are in this 22-24, we are getting funding for more of the Tableau software as well.
Thank you. And I know that Sarah is planning to convene multiple webinars to share best practices. And so sites will be able to learn from each other about solutions just like that one. And then also, of course, identify common barriers. I see a hand up from RJ.
Yeah, so I had a question. One thing that it was my experience with tracking relationships between individuals. We used the CRM at Project Able. That was really awesome, but it had to be custom built to everything that we needed to document. And so I'm wondering if that's something that we can take on with the Technical Assistance Fund to be able to create a customer relationship management tool and just add these grantees as users to that tool so that they're all tracking the same stuff.
Yeah, that's actually quite aligned with our work plan, actually. So at OHSU, we use a system called REDCap, or we have access to it, and it's a secure system where we can do very similar work to what you were just describing, RJ. So right in line with what we're hoping to do, to have maybe some base core metrics that we collect that are consistent across sites, and then being able to build out more elaborate or more detailed metrics for folks who have a little bit more data capacity. So that's actually right in line with what our work plan is set out to do. And Liz, I defer to you if you have anything you want to add to that.
I think that the one thing I want to add is that, a goal with the REDCap database is to be able to track progress at the individual client level. And I think we all know how sensitive that information will be. So that's another piece that we'll need to work directly with grantees to see how we can code data, right? So that the information in the REDCap database that's sitting on a server at OHSU doesn't have name, birthday information that is identifiable. We also want to make sure, that we are not sharing identifiable information back to CJC, back to Center for Health Systems Effectiveness, to link with much more detailed administrative data. So these are issues that we're very aware of and are also going to kind of vary site by site. We've been working with Clackamas County Community Corrections on a couple of projects and have developed some solutions that have worked for us in Clackamas. Those might not be right for every site.
Awesome, thank you.
And your hand is still up.
I tried to take it down to signal that I had questions. But yes, I'm here. So, quick question for Sarah. Reading the report and listening to you today, I know that we heard from the grantees that certainly there are struggles with the target population, which is completely understandable given all the things that have happened in the past couple of years. But then also we heard, or I saw in the report, that they appreciated our flexibility in trying to allow them to expand that net, but that also that was kind of a double-edged sword, that it led to a lot of a lack of clarity into who the population was. Did you get any more detail or guidance from the grantees on how we can try better to hit that sweet spot, or any thoughts from them on that, on where along the continuum to go? Because I think that we wanted to give them maximum flexibility, but certainly that seems to maybe have actually been to their detriment at times. I'm not sure, but I don't know if you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I'd say that the grantees were expressing very clearly that their programs could not have been set up without that level of flexibility because of the challenges that they faced. So it was essential at the time, and I think it's a really good opportunity to kind of take a step back, or really take a step together, bringing grantees together and making sure that we're all on the same page about what the vision is for the program, what the target population definition is, and strategizing collectively how people confirm someone is eligible for services or not eligible for services. So I really do think that having these opportunities to convene grantees will be a really nice way to hopefully remediate any of the challenges to tracking outcomes across sites, and really a first step towards problem solving collectively.
Thanks, that's useful. And I think with the things that we're trying to plan on bringing grantees together in the new year and in the future, you're right, that'd be a very, very beneficial thing to do. So yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Totally.
Sarah, I don't see any more raised hands or comments in the chat.
Great. Well, we really appreciate the time today and the opportunity to share and walk through the findings, because of getting a big report sent to your email is not always the easiest thing to carve out time to review. So thank you, Casey. I will pass it back to you. And if anyone has questions, I can drop my email in the chat as well. Feel free to reach out to me.
And we're also happy to answer questions and would love feedback from the grant review committee in addition to the grantees.
Thank you all so much. Super appreciate you being here to help present those findings. And Sarah, yeah, if you don't mind sharing your email address in the chat, I think that would be really helpful. All right, as we navigate back here to getting the PowerPoint up. Fantastic. All right, well, we are going to invite Will back into the conversation to discuss quarterly reporting from the impacts grantees.
Thank you, Casey. Can everybody hear me okay? I just want to make sure before I get started. I see some thumbs up. Thank you very much. So again, my name is Will. I've been with the CJC for about a month and a half, and it's been fantastic so far. And what I have for you is very different than what you just heard, which was very qualitative. And I have the statewide reporting that has the hard numbers in it. And so there are some points that I want to go through before we get started. Our goal here was twofold. Primarily, it's been a little while since you may have seen some quarterly reporting. And in some cases, you have not seen any at all if you're a new member of the review committee. And so what we tried to do was just start this process of showing some changes over time, some trends, or at least how things may have changed from one quarter to another. Again, there's a lot of variability in the programs within impacts. And so some of them are large, some of them are small. So we should take care that in some cases, very small changes in one impacts program can have a sort of cascading effect in the reporting. And when I notice that, I'll make sure and point that out. But for this demographics, there was a QI overhaul that started asking some more detailed information about the participants in the impacts programs. We have that available for 3 quarters. And so here on the left side, what you see is a table that talks about race and ethnicity, and then we'll talk about gender and disability status as well. But I do want to point out that here on the left side in the table that discusses race, largely we still see that very roughly half of the impacts population is white. It does vary very slightly from 48 to 51 to 50, but generally right around half consistently 2022 so far have been white. Among those that are Black and African American, we do see a general increase. It's very small, but it is increasing quarter over quarter. Among those who are American Indian, we do still see in the first quarter, there was a lower value that did increase to up to a full quarter of the participants and then drop slightly. When we get to the end, I'll discuss how some reporting changes may have affected that. And then in the Asian Pacific Islander row, what we see is that it is, again, very slight increases from 4 to 7, and then it dropped down to 1, but this is not a huge change over time. Among the Latinx population, it was steady and then has in the first quarter of the new grant cycle increased slightly to around 4%. The biggest change in this table comes between Q7 and Q8. There were, if you look at the last row under unknown, there were a substantial number whose race and ethnicity was simply unknown. But between Q7 and Q8, we are better able to determine racial and ethnic identity, as well as if you turn your attention to the top right sort of line graph, that yellow line that you see was also unknown. So we are better specifying some of the demographic information. The grantees are better specifying some of the demographic information from their programs. And so if we continue with gender here on the right side, what you see is that yellow line. We did have some that was unknown, and that has dropped to 0 in the most recent quarters. We do generally know the gender identity of the people who are being served in impacts programs. We did see a sort of dip in the blue line, which is the male response or the male clients from Q7 to Q8, but it has rebounded back into the first quarter of the 2022 reporting. As well as we saw the decrease in the unknown, we saw an increase in female respondents. which has been dipped back to a very similar number to the first quarter of reporting that we have from 2022. I do want to point out here that this gray line is not zero. It looks like it's zero, and it is rather low, but the number is not zero. There are fewer than 5 currently, people who identify as non-binary, which is roughly 0.5%, but that value is not zero. And then in the bottom right, you see 2 lines. This discusses disability status. I do want to start and caution that this measure is not sensitive enough to capture those cases where someone has both a physical disability as well as a developmental disability. So you can't really just simply add them together. The value may actually be slightly lower, but we can't detect that with this level of reporting. But if we look at this sort of mustard colored line, which represents developmental disability, we see that it was just under 10% at the beginning of 2022, and it jumped into Q8, which was the second quarter. And then in our last quarter of reporting, it has gone down slightly to just under 15%, which is still a substantial number. And then the blue line on the same line graph beneath it represents physical disability, those clients with physical disabilities. And although it did change very slightly from Q7 to Q8, we do see a large increase in the most recent reporting from the first quarter of the new grant cycle. Next slide, please, Casey. Thank you. And so here with the average of clients served, I was able to provide a sort of year look. So this first quarter, Q6, is actually October reporting from last year. So just about a year, we have 4 quarters that we can look at. And I'll go through this as sort of couplets. So as we can see, there is generally some type of need as well as some type of services provided if you're looking to make more sense of the table. And so the first of these is employment need. As you can see, it does vary naturally. Some people, depending on the way the economy is in a local area, they may need more or less employment help at a specific quarter in the year. However, the need is still strong. It increased into Q7, it dipped slightly, but it's higher than it's ever been in the last 4 quarters in the most recent reporting. And that is above the average for that last rolling 4 quarters. In terms of services provided, it follows a similar pattern. We see an increase from into 2022 from the end of 2021, and then a slight dip, and then a rebound that increases again to very near the average of the last 4 quarters. And then for housing need and housing services, this is still, as we've heard from our colleagues, this is a very pressing need among this population. 142 this time or so last year. And then it increased to 160, dipped again, but it's again higher than it's been at 205 people needing, impacts clients needing housing assistance. Whenever we talk about housing services, this is one of those places where the measure can be kind of tricky, and I want to make sure and call that out. This includes both temporary and permanent housing placements. And the reason they're together is because with quarterly reporting, it is often the case that we get notes from grantees who tell us we had several people who got both in the same quarter. They may have started with a more transitional placement and then were able to find a more permanent placement within that same 3-month period. And so just in this case, they were combined together because we can't differentiate one versus another. And so housing services, again, very generally is increasing. There was a slight dip between Q7 and Q8, but we just look at the general trend, it is providing more housing services, and certainly more than in this last quarter than the average of the last 4. The next 2 assess mental health need and the number of impacts clients served. This, again, aside from a very slight decrease between Q7 and Q8, has been trending upward. 253 is people who are in need of mental health. They can be identified formally. They can also be identified through case management or perhaps a referral from another agency. But that need is strong. If that is just over in the last quarter of Q1, it's just about 2/3 of the total. And then among the people who are receiving those services for mental health, very similar pattern. We dropped a little bit, but it has remained steady in Q7, Q8, and into Q1, just a few numbers different there. Look at substance use, however, we generally see increases quarter over quarter over quarter in both need and served, population served. So substance use certainly over the last 4 quarters has increased both in need and number of people served. And then a dual diagnosis is referring here to those who have both a mental health and a substance use diagnosis, and these are very strong, very large percentages. If there were, I think, 309 people in the last quarter, and so 150 is very close to half of the people who have a dual diagnosis in the impacts population. Next slide, please, Casey. Thank you very much. And so as we're talking about diagnosis, I did want to kind of break up some of the large tables of numbers. And so I included here a broader discussion of diagnoses that we receive. What we get from the grantees is the top 3 diagnoses and the frequency. So for example, generalized anxiety disorder, and we had 9 cases of that. And we get that for the top 3 diagnoses from each of the grantees. Remember, this only includes the original 11 as the new grant programs are standing up. So that's why we're able to provide this sort of trend look over the last 4 quarters, because we have the same, all of the same grantees. And so the way that this works is these are just conceptual categories. Y'all, I'm not a clinician. That's not what this is intended to be, but we do get a very wide array of diagnoses from the grantees in their quarterly reporting. And so I do want to try to parse through some of that for the committee. And so as I go through these, I will try to remember to tell you what types of things go into each one. But as has already been alluded to, some of the grantees are housed in behavioral health. And so from them, we often get ICD-10 codes, and we may only get an ICD-10 code, which is fine. Sometimes we get a written diagnosis that corresponds. And then from some other programs, we may only get something like anxiety disorder versus an ICD-10 code that is associated with generalized anxiety disorder. But in those cases, what those things have in common is anxiety. And so that's the sort of conceptual categorization I was going through on this slide. So if I did see something that was generalized anxiety disorder unspecified, or in some cases, there were a few that simply said anxiety, that was counted here in this first row. And so the reason it's in the top position is not that it's first every single time, but that its quarterly average is highest. But as you can tell, it does vary, and I think naturally so. Diagnoses can change, right? People can be in or out. They may be housed somewhere else and then come back for services. But broadly, what we do see is that there are anxiety-related diagnoses are incredibly common, followed closely by post-traumatic stress disorder. This one is much more straightforward. We get either PTSD or we get post-traumatic stress disorder from the grantees. And so those are put together conceptually just to illustrate here that while we see in Q6, these were down, we did see a jump into Q7 in the number of diagnoses related to PTSD that then tapered off again and increased. And so if I had presented this differently, perhaps by quarter, you would still see the same names. They would just be in different position. One may move from second to third and another from maybe fifth to fourth. But there is not substantial change in these 5 categories over time. Third, anything that is related simply to substance use disorder. We get from grantees, we get substance use disorder, SUD, we get an ICD-10 code for it. But if it is not more specific than that, it is categorized as substance use disorder here, just on this table. And so as you can see, there was a spike from Q6 to Q7 at the beginning of 2022, which was Q7 in substance use disorder, but then it is taper off and it is very steady, right? It's very steady and routinely diagnosed. Anything related to bipolar, which most often comes in as bipolar 1 or bipolar 2 or just the word bipolar. Sort of categorize those together. It seemed appropriate to do so. And while these values may be lower than, for example, anxiety or PTSD, they are still substantial. They still happen frequently. We had, again, a slight increase and then another dip and then another increase into the first quarterly reporting. Now, the only sort of tricky thing here is with the substance use disorder. If it is more specified than that, as it is in this case of amphetamine use disorder, which we got, as well as methamphetamine use disorder. Then we also got a lot of like stimulant dependence. Then those seem, again, to go together. And that one is actually showing an increase over time. That could be an artifact of, as time progresses, clinicians are better able to diagnose, versus a general substance use disorder versus something more specific, or it could be reflecting a trend in the population. And I didn't want to overcrowd this table. There are a few more diagnoses that come up regularly, but they're not in the top, top 5 here. So the next 3 in the list, for those who are interested, for the quarterly average, that's roughly 25, is anything related to schizophrenia. And then number 7 and 8, they sort of jockey for position. They're there consistently, but they're not nearly as common as, for example, anxiety-related diagnoses. And those are, we get it as alcohol use disorder, we get it as excessive alcohol use or something relating to alcohol. And the other we get is very straightforward, and it is schizoaffective disorder. So these are the most common ones that we get. Again, I didn't want to muddy the table too much with too many rows. However, these are the most common. Next slide, Casey. All right, back to numbers, y'all. In this case, this is the rest of the services provided. Those with asterisks that you see to the right of the service indicate this is a number of times, and it's not necessarily linked to an individual. And so in some cases, for example, with reentry, these are individuals, but those with asterisks are not. They are a number of times. And so the first of these is also reflected on the line graph to the right of the table. And it is the mustard colored line that is reflecting those times when an impact staff is assisting law enforcement. And so what I was able to do, some of this reporting was available for Q6 and some of it was not. And I wanted to be very careful about the graphics. So I just included those points on the line graph just to show you a little bit more of a trend. And so here, as we see with this mustard line, we did have a very slight increase going into 2022, but since then it has increased quarter over quarter. And most recently, 185 was the most recent value. And it's the number of times that someone associated with impacts has assisted law enforcement for the client. And the next of these is also reflected on that same line graph and in the table, and that's about law enforcement or jail diversion services. And although it did have a very slight increase from this time last year going into Q1, ever since then it has remained steady. And this is something that we want to see. We want to see more diversions, and so this is a consistent high number. We talk about reentry. It did have a spike in Q8, but it is largely still a very pressing need. Roughly a third of the population served has reentry need, and then among services provided, that has been either consistent or increasing into the first quarter. The next 3 of these are success stories, y'all. This is Oregon Health Plan, and so part of impacts clients are screened for Oregon Health Plan, and then their eligibility is determined, and then in many cases they are actually assisted with applying for Oregon Health Plan. And as we see quarter over quarter, these have increased in 2022. And so most recently, 173 impacts clients have been screened for OHP, and then 36 were provided with assistance to actually apply for Oregon Health Plan. As we heard earlier, case management is very common. It comes up in the qualitative, and it also comes up very commonly in terms of services provided to clients as well. This is roughly 2/3, right, are receiving some kind of case management. And then in this very last item here about community hospital prevention or diversion, I recognize that the trend line is not doing what we want it to do, but I also want us to take care and understand that many of our programs are not based in behavioral health. They're not located in a position where they can really affect this. And at the same time, much of this number is coming from a very small number of grantees. And by that, I mean, even though we do see a decline in Q1 and that value is 176 and it seems low, much of that is coming from 1, maybe 2 grantees, something like almost 70%. And in previous quarters, it's been higher than that. In Q7, for example, over 80% of this value was coming from 1, maybe 2 grantees. So I don't think we should, or I think we should take care not to interpret this line too harshly and understand that something like a staffing change at a behavioral health impacts program can have substantial changes on this aggregate level reporting, such as prevention. Casey?
Thanks, Will. Wanted to pause and see if any GRC members had any specific questions about the information that Will has shared with us. All right.
Sorry, this is Stacy. I couldn't get unmuted. I appreciate that you didn't want to muddy the table with too many diagnoses, but I think the ones that you talked to towards the end are really powerful, even though they are a little further down on the list, because I think they're often forgotten or even assumed that those are the higher ones that we're dealing with, and it's really not. And I also think that sometimes we really downplay the role of alcohol or alcohol abuse in our population. So although I understand you don't want to get too many on there, I did think that those were all really important to share.
I will include them next time for sure.
Okay, thank you.
And Judge Shanti, I see your hands up.
Yeah, thank you so much for this data. And I'm thinking about your presentation and comparing it to the presentation of the people that were just before you that had interviewed the grantees and gathered some of their frustrations about really identifying target population, and that they're making headway that's not captured in the data that we're looking at. And I'm wondering if it would be wise to see what we can do about that, to get that flexibility built into it, and to see if we can capture some of that without, upending what we've already tracked. Does that make sense? Like, I know that it's dangerous to change what you're capturing midstream, but at the same time, it was pretty powerful, the presentation, that so many applicants are frustrated that the positives that they're achieving are not necessarily captured. And of course, we have the ongoing problem that there's a bunch of grantees that really still don't have the capacity to capture even what we're asking for. So I just was wondering about your thoughts about kind of that topic.
Yes, absolutely. I do hear that fear that changing the reporting can be problematic. I also really like the idea of each grantee having opportunities to provide supplemental reporting so that they can not necessarily tell us these stories, but share these successes with us, because this is absolutely something that we need to know about. And frankly, I was a little stunned when I read that at first, and I went, oh, we're not capturing everything. And so there absolutely is space there. I think that is something that perhaps the QI subcommittee can take away from this grant review committee meeting and work on before the next one, to see what that may look like at the grantee level. But certainly I do believe there is space at the very minimum for building capacity and supplemental reporting where these success stories can be shared, because that helps us discuss things like cost avoidance.
Well, I think that's good. And I'm also thinking about, like, the comments. There were some telling comments in the last presentation from the people, like, we don't tell the police, no, these aren't in our category, because if we do, they'll stop bringing the people to us. And the part about, like, they're not, we've got them identified as the target population, but then that's a static number. And so it's not that helpful to do it that way. And so I'm also wondering if we should think about tweaking how that works. A long time ago, it seems like 2 lifetimes ago now, before COVID, we worked so hard to come up with what is the target population, 4 times in custody and And no, it's not. It's also a frequent user. And there was some heated and, you know, valuable airing of different ideas about that. But then when we see it in practice, I'm wondering if a lot of that was not much to do about nothing. And I'm not saying we don't have a target population, but that flexibility piece seems to be important if we're going to let the grantees use this money to actually help people, and then B, because the rigidity of our target population as we conceived it originally seems to be defeating our purpose. So what do you think about that issue?
I think that you bring up very valid points. It is concerning that people who may otherwise be part of the target population, but for whatever reason, perhaps were not whenever all of this began. Maybe I think some of the point in time list may even be from like 2017, and that's pretty old information. And so there is it will take time. Linking some of the administrative data, which is a project that I'm working on as well. If we can get this information linked, we may have a better opportunity to help on behalf of the grantees. But it is a significant challenge, and in many cases has brought problems as well as some solutions in changing things.
Thanks, Will. I second that. Judge Shanti, thank you so much for your comments. For the new members of our grant review committee, I wanted to do a quick side note of the QI subcommittee that Will mentioned is the Quality Improvement Subcommittee. And it's a subcommittee that this GRC has convened. A couple of our GRC members are on that subcommittee, and some of our grantees are on that subcommittee, and then interested parties in the community, a couple of those as well. And what that subcommittee does is really focus on the quality improvement of data and data collection, data sharing, et cetera. It's an opportunity for folks to talk about the challenges they're facing, talk about, the ideas for overcoming those barriers and challenges. Andrew Powell, who previously worked on this, had several QI subcommittee meetings during this year. And, we definitely have heard a lot of grantee feedback about adding more metrics. And as just Judge Shanti mentioned, it's difficult to change expectations for grantees reporting kind of like midway down the stream. But we do recognize the value that some folks are able to report more than others. So Will, I love your idea of having maybe like a supplemental section or a sheet 2 where in which folks can actually, in addition to their qualitative biannual reports that happen twice per year, they're able to actually put numbers to some of those qualitative pieces of what they're capturing outside of the metrics that we're requesting of them. And then, yeah, I think, again, to Judge Shanti's point of what can we help change? I think it's just a great thing of let's discuss it in further with further time, and let's talk about it the next QI subcommittee meeting. Alicia Beamer, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I just wonder, and I don't know if this is possible, but how to quantify the intensive case management that goes in. I know you said that in case management is the #1 area that folks are working on, but it's also in my experience, very intensive case management, and there's a lot of time and being pretty creative, meeting the individual where they're at and getting them connected, developing that trusting relationship and connected to multiple different services in the community to have that success, whether they're diverting from the ED or the jails. And so I don't know how to quantify that in this work, but I really do think that's going to be important moving forward, especially as you're trying to build sustainable programs.
Absolutely. I love that idea. I think I can speak for every grantee, the original 11 from the 2020 to 2022 grant cycle, it is intensive case management. This is not a checklist of folks that they're looking at names and just checking boxes. They're developing relationships with these clients. They're invested in their success. So the idea of tracking metrics like actual time spent with clients, like actual hours, would be really interesting, I think. And then in maybe qualitative aspects of, you know, how are you being creative to connect with folks?
Right.
How are you being creative in establishing community connections so that you're setting these folks up for success when they, you know, are diverted out of a certain ED or jail? But yeah, Alicia, I think those are great points.
Thanks.
Liz, I see your hands up.
Yeah, thank you. This is more of a question, I think, following on that last comment and a couple points in the data. How big of a factor is staff turnover right now? Certainly in homeless services, we were experiencing a ton of staff turnover that really did impact the ability to maintain those productive, supportive relationships. How much of that are you seeing in this group of grantees?
A lot. It's unprecedented still. And I think not only turnover rates in general among grantees, but actual vacant positions that have existed since the inception of their programs. Everyone on this call, I think, is aware of the staffing crisis that healthcare institutions across the United States have experienced throughout the pandemic. And although things are opening up, we're not really seeing a giant increase in folks being available and willing to take on those positions. And then considering to the geographical areas that some of these grantees are in, some of them are very rural. And some of them, like the tribal grantees, take up multiple what would be like colonial county jurisdictions. And I think that getting certain providers to those areas proves to be very challenging. So long story short, Liz, absolutely, we're seeing it. And of course in housing as well, but especially within the healthcare providers that are involved with this grant. Go ahead.
There was a comment that Valerie put in the chat that listed several specific things that we could potentially use to capture intensity, and I am writing every one of them down. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again, Will, for sharing that information with us, and I appreciate the robust discussion. We have one, last thing on our agenda really to discuss today, and that is unallocated grant funding. So this right here is an overview of the funding and where we currently stand. You'll see in that top row for the 2022 through 2024 grant cycle, the legislature appropriated $10 million additional dollars to the original $10 million from the last grant cycle to be utilized. We went through a cycle with the original 11 grantees at the kind of like springtime of this year to ask them what their current needs were, if they were to continue their project periods for another 2 years, how much money would it take for that continued service level, and if they had any ideas for expansion or enhancement of their programs. The Grant Review Committee reviewed those requests, and approximately $6.4 million was awarded to those original 11 grantees to just keep the train going through June 30th, 2024. And I guess of note that also considered that many of those grantees had some money, some savings left over from their original project period due to those hiring challenges, due to general pandemic challenges. And so the reason that it wasn't another full 10 million as it was the first round was because of that savings. And in response to that, we were able to open up a new request for grant proposals to counties, tribes, and regional consortia. And at the August 16th meeting this year, the Grant Review Committee reviewed the 4 proposals that they received, and all 4 were awarded. So we now have 4 new grantees, and about $2.1 million was what was awarded to those folks. So long story short, there are $1.4 million that remain unallocated, and that is what we're hoping to talk a little bit more about today. At the August 16th GRC meeting, this Grant Review Committee identified several priorities for the use of unallocated grant funds. There were basically 4 major areas. One was capacity building by way of funds to expand or enhance existing programs. Added capacity could serve as new or increased supports and services available or provided to the target population. And this could include things like extending hours of operation, like how often someone is open and how long during the day they're open. That includes days of operation. It could include things like adding staff, serving more individuals, maybe opening up, their current capacity is 30 individuals, but perhaps funds to expand their program would allow them to see 40 or 50 individuals. And it could also include things like incorporating or developing new supports or services. Another identified priority was engagement in diversity, inclusion, and cultural responsiveness efforts. In practice, this might take the form of a low barrier funding formula where grantees could opt in for a set amount of funding for efforts, such as identifying the communities they serve, determining gaps in inclusivity, enhancing culturally responsive services, receiving specialized training, etc. And then another priority that the GRC identified was technical assistance for the various needs previously identified through those local program evaluation qualitative interviews that the Waddell Research Group presented on. And of course, any additional opportunities that come up in conversation in the future. But examples could include things like HIPAA training, small group work sessions around collective medical software, which for those of you who are not familiar with collective medical, it's a software that allows folks to track members of their target population when they pop up in certain emergency departments that are also using collective medical software. So it's a great way to stay informed of when your members of target population are going into different EDs. This could also include informational sessions from external experts. And, gosh, there are many different ways that technical assistance could be provided to these grantees. And then that last area that was identified by the Grant Review Committee as a priority was increased program or outcome evaluation and data support. So on one hand, this would focus on increasing efforts with our research partners at the OHSU PSU School of Public Health, the Waddell Research Group, as well as our partners at OHSU Center for Health Systems Effectiveness, CHSE, which is Stephanie Renfro and Erica Simeon, if you guys have met them before. But efforts would include things like continued assistance with data integration and collection, and further analysis and reporting of the outcomes and effects of impacts. The more we can, begin to collect this data, the better we can analyze it in the future. So that was definitely something that the Grant Review Committee saw and identified. But if you remember, at that August meeting, the GRC requested that input on these priorities be solicited from grantees. So that's what we did. A survey was developed and sent out to all 15 grantees. Note that that includes the 4 new grantees. And it asked them to rank those 4 GRC identified priorities. And 8 grantees responded. Scores were created for each funding option using a weighted average to determine preference, and the overall rankings are presented here. So capacity building was the #1 choice among respondents, followed by engagement in diversity, inclusion, and cultural responsiveness efforts as choice #2. And then technical assistance and increased program outcome evaluation and data support tied for choice #3. So 67% of respondents indicated preference for capacity building. And of those folks who ranked capacity building as their #1 preference, there was an optional text box to say, hey, do you have any ideas for that enhancement or expansion of your program? And the 4 folks who responded, things that came up in all of those responses were support for short or long-term housing and increased staffing. And I also wanted to take a second to note that of the 8 grantees that responded, 2 respondents selected engagement in diversity, inclusion, and cultural responsiveness as their top priority. And 1 respondent selected technical assistance as their top priority. So the weight of, what you selected as your #1 preference, that's what created this ranking here, the 1, 2, 3 with a tie. But I wanted to make note that 2 folks did say that the diversity, inclusion, and cultural responsiveness efforts were their top priority, and 1 selected TA. So as far as considerations for next steps, according to Senate Bill 973, it's the responsibility of the Grant Review Committee to decide what to do with these unallocated funds. The bill outlines, specifically outlines several considerations that I've listed here. And a lot of this text comes right from the bill, so it's a little wordy. But that first point is, if unallocated funds remain, the GRC, may establish a supplemental round for current grantees to apply. Other ideas for funding include up to 20% or $2 million of that total $10 million allotment this time around may be used to support the design and implementation of community-based services, including but not limited to. And I also want to note there was quite a long list, but I thought I'd highlight 4 relevant ones here. TA to grantees for troubleshooting data collection and data sharing, statewide training, whether it be in person or remote, focused on improving outcomes for the target population, developing or strengthening a centralized system to make available to communities practitioners in professional specialties for which there is a shortage, and one-time investment in information technology to support the data system needs for the evaluation, accountability, and innovation components of the program. And then come to the last little nugget selected from Senate Bill 973 was that 3% of funds, or $300,000, must be used to support outcome measures, evaluation, or both. So with that being said, at this time, there's approximately $1.4 million in grant funding that remains unallocated. It's worth noting that this current grant cycle that we're in began July 1st of this year, and the 4 new grantees only finished signing their contracts last month, which was October. And therefore, they're in the very beginning stages of standing up their programs, and currently, it's kind of impossible to be sure of what their future needs will be. It's possible that during the upcoming legislative session, but especially after, we'll have a greater idea as to what the future of this grant holds, which may better inform decisions around unallocated funding. For what it's worth, we only received input from 8 of the 15 total grantees, and it's possible we could create a focus group to solicit more input from those non-respondents, should that be of interest. And I, wanted to highlight that while it's the GRC's responsibility to decide how to move forward with these unallocated funds, no hard decision is necessary today. As a reminder, these funds have been designated as other fund, which allows for more flexibility in spending money across biennia. We have no deadline for getting money out the door to grantees by a certain date. And then I wanted to mention that our next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, February 14th. Judge Shanti, I do see your hands up and wanted to acknowledge that. Do you have a specific question for me right now, or is it more discussion for the grant review committee?
It's discussion.
Perfect. I'll have you wait for just one more minute. Thank you. So, consideration for next steps, the GRC could invest in one or multiple of the identified priorities, or even possibly something that wasn't prioritized. The GRC could create set-asides and, set aside a certain amount of funding for one of those priorities and then invest in another in a different way, or open up a supplemental funding round. The GRC could consider that capacity building option for grantees to maybe include both programmatic and data collection and reporting capacity, and have that be like the primary allotment for funding. And, Will helped me in the creation of this particular slide because he said that specifically would address several points from the OHSU report that we heard from the Waddell Research Group. And as part of that kind of double whammy, technical assistance would be required for all grantees. So that would be part of the investment. The GRC could also consider a set aside of funds for engaging in diversity, inclusion, and cultural responsiveness efforts. As a reminder, that was chosen as a top priority by 2 survey respondents. And it would be worth considering, would that be required, or would it be something that grantees may opt into, and what that might look like? So at this time, I would like to invite discussion from the GRC. You've previously identified priorities. We've solicited input from the grantees. Today, we've heard about the needs that were identified by the Waddell Research Group in their qualitative interviews with the original grantees. So how would you like to move forward? Let's open up discussion and know that no hard decision needs to be made today. We don't need to vote on this. This is kind of just an open discussion. And I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen so that everyone can see each other. Judge Shanti, would you like to begin?
Yeah, thank you. And sorry you can't see me. If you see me, I'll freeze up. So I have to just be a voice in the air. So as I think about this, what I'd like us to do is go back to the original reason for the impacts grant, which is to see if counties and tribes can come up with a better way to do business that addresses the needs of these people that are high-end users of the criminal justice system and the medical system. And we originally, created all this, the target population and worked through what the criteria were with the hope that some of these programs would rise to the top as being particularly successful, and then they could be maybe built out across the state. And we purposely tried to pick a mix of areas that have a higher population and rural areas, realizing that it wouldn't be necessarily a one-size-fits-all. So as I think about what we learned from the Waddell group, and also from Ken's data sharing with us, what becomes clear to me is that the piece that we're going to really need if we are really going to want to use this program to build out and get more sustainable funding to come up with on these programs that show that they're working, that we might want to duplicate other places, is we need the data and the what it's going to take to be able to the accountability and show the legislature, yeah, if you give us $10 million, here's what we can do. If we don't pay attention to that piece, even though it's not the sexy piece, and even though it's not you know, it doesn't seem like the bang for the buck, right? I mean, you want housing for this person that doesn't have a house. But if we don't pay attention to this more boring aspect, we're not going to have the information that's going to show that it works, we're accountable for the money, and hey, please give us more. So I think it's really important at this stage for us to start looking at like the feedback from the Waddell group, what needs to be changed so these programs can actually reach this population, provide service to them, and account for the positive stuff that they're doing that maybe right now is not captured. And how can we support them in being able to provide that information? So I mean, I would like to give money for all of these purposes. They're all really valuable purposes, but I do think the long term is we wanted these programs, we wanted to test if there was something that was going to work that we could go back to get more money for and say, yeah, and maybe we can build these up and build them out. And if we don't have the accountability piece in the proof piece, then it's just like they gave us a bunch of money and we kind of anecdotally tell them it's working, but it's not going to be enough. So I would just like us to think about that. And I know that, you know, there's those other things are also very important.
Thanks, Judge Shanti. And Dr. Brigham, I see your hands up, and I also invite, you know, I don't have to call on you. I realize we love this to be an open discussion among DRC members. So Dr. Brigham, go ahead.
So if I'm understanding, we've asked for feedback on the priorities from the grantees, and we've just heard your responses to that, but we haven't, I don't think we've asked for or received specific proposals. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I would be interested in seeing specific proposals for how the grantees would put these funds to work. And, you know, to the point of evaluation and so on, it sounded like that was a priority for some of the grantees, and we might hear how they would use that. But I think also increasing capacity of programs that might already be working and addressing those needs could contribute to more robust results and greater numbers of people served. So it might also go to the point of proving the program, improving the models. But you know, it seems like the next step would be, unless we make a decision to go another direction, would be to ask for specific proposals. It's a little hard, in other words, to just say, well, let's put the money into this priority or that priority without seeing, you know, specifically the plans for using the money.
Hey, Casey, it's Alicia. Can you remind us how much money is it for the data that we can use? Like, there's a cap to it, right? And
Yeah.
so since we've rolled the grant over, I'm just wondering, does that change, or I lost track of it, so.
No, that's fair. So there's kind of two separate things that are called out in Senate Bill 9783. The one that you might be thinking of is the specific, like 3% of funds
Right. Okay,
must be used to support outsiders. And
we
Ken,
have done that?
yeah, I would actually be curious. So we did do that for the first round, but does that happen again for the next appropriation from the legislature?
Oh, do you mean would it happen if we get yet another appropriation in this upcoming long session?
Or even this current one, because
this last.
Yes, well, the way that we understand the legislation, it did. And so when we awarded the funds to Liz Waddell and her amazing colleagues, we spent about $600,000. And so that would have accounted for both of those buckets from the initial funding and the new. So that has been allocated. I think there's that other piece that Casey identified earlier, the up to $2 million for some of these more specific projects. That's where we could focus if we wanted to.
Exactly, yeah. So that other piece, Alicia, was specifically up to 20% or 2 million may be used to support design and implementation, and it had a including but not limited to list. And one of those was like TA, developing centralized systems, statewide trainings, investment in information technology, like that kind of ran the gamut. But so that is a separate piece from that 600 grand.
Okay, and that's 2 million per 10 million, so it could be up 4 million really, right?
Technically, yeah.
Okay. All right. I mean, I'm with Judge Shante as far as really the data is so important. I think we're at like the surface of it, but we still have so much opportunity to really tell the story on how these programs are impacting these really highly vulnerable individuals. I'm not suggesting we have $4 million in data, but it's still, I just think we're at kind of the surface, and there's so much more that we could get if we really developed a more sophisticated process to capture that data. So.
Do any other GRC members have thoughts on, the priorities that you previously identified, or comments on the grantee feedback?
This is Greg. I wanted to comment again. So I'm supportive of the data approach as well. In my mind, though, I do worry about, the projects were defined so differently up front with, the cohorts and the types of services. And, we saw a very uneven implementation when we reviewed, who had been able to use the funds and not. And so I think there are challenges beyond just technical in terms of how the partnerships were lined up in the beginning, how the cohorts were designed. And so it feels like no matter how elegant the data analysis becomes, we're still just working with the underlying data that's there and what's been implemented. So I think that's a limitation. But I'm sure there's more we could do. Again, it's a little hard to say without a specific kind of idea of what we would do with more resources in that area.
Yeah, is the 600 that we've already spent, is it ongoing? Is there, or like there's more that we'll be capturing a long time, or?
Yeah, I would say this is the tip of the iceberg. And we've
Okay.
also been working with, as Liz mentioned, the Center for Health System Effectiveness at OHSU. That is an effort that will require some additional money in the future. They envisioned, if I recall correctly, 3 separate stages. And we were able to fund the first one during this biennium, but we would be looking basically what they want to do is to link all the administrative data together to try to take some of the onus off of the grantees for some of the harder data pieces that we need. And maybe they could focus then more on the qualitative information or some of the richer stories that we've heard today. But CHSC would be looking to do evaluations at regular intervals into the next biennium so that we have more of that systematic data coming in. So that's all ongoing. Some of that's not paid for yet, but a lot of this work is with Liz's group. So a couple overlapping things on the giant Venn diagram of data.
My apologies if all of this is known information, because today is my first meeting, but does it, related to data collection, is staffing of data positions an allowable way that folks could be using the data collection? Because my perspective is from a community-based organization, and I know that we struggled a lot with requests for data collection, but we're not allowed within whatever organization of our grants to actually hire staff to do that. Is that a limitation of this funding, or is that a potential way that grantees could use the fund?
I think we have, as a committee, been pretty open as to what the grantees specify that they need. I don't believe, in Casey, you might have to correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe anybody requested money for that specifically through the history of the program yet. But I think also, you know, a lot of programs are focusing on getting off the ground or focusing on other essential staff. But I think it's something we could certainly offer, or I think as a grant review committee, we could maybe even prioritize, you know, we could say, you know, that we've done it with some other grants at CJC to where, you know, you can get some priority status if you include either your own in-house data individual, or if you partner with, you know, an outside research university or other type of researcher. That way you don't have to necessarily pull that person as an FTE. You could do it more from that contractual standpoint.
And Ken, there was the application, kind of the enhancement request from Douglas County
Thank you.
to,
I
yeah,
thought there might be one, but I didn't want to go overstate.
that was awarded,
Thank you.
that specific FTEs there. And Liz, specifically, that Douglas County one was the one previously mentioned in a comment in the chat, which was the Tableau software. And then Ellen came on to talk about what that kind of looked like.
That's right. But I think too, we should, and this maybe goes beyond the scope of the discussion about what just to do with the funding that we have. But I think that we have some of our grantees that are much farther along. I mean, I think Douglas County has been one of our superstars that's been able to take this a lot farther than others. But then we have some other grantees through no fault of their own that I think, as it was read in the report, you know, they can't even get information from other local partners, so that if they had a data person, that person would probably be sitting doing almost nothing because the data linkages aren't there for various reasons. And so I think that might be a good use, you know, whether it's technical assistance from us or from others, to try to help them continue to set those up and overcome those barriers.
And it looks like Stephanie actually chimed in the comments to confirm that CHSE proposes to produce a baseline report, which is already funded, as well as a cycle 1 and cycle 2 evaluation, all based on state administrative data sources and focused on the primary goals of impacts. Was the program successful at reducing criminal justice involvement, hospitalizations, and institutional placements? Thanks, Stephanie.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie, for filling in my my gaps there. But yeah, certainly those two outcome evaluations, which I think are key, that's what we do want to look at funding in the future, whether that's through impacts or maybe there's some method that CJC itself can take to get that moving, depending on what this next budget cycle looks like.
Yeah, sure thing. And I can just add, we're hoping that our evaluation will help fill some of those data gaps. So we know, based on the qualitative report by Waddell's group, that, you know, like Oregon State Hospital data was really hard for most of the grantees to obtain. Whereas we're, you know, that will be part of our statewide evaluation. The data linkages that are really difficult, we're working with a group on that. So, so really hoping, you know, the administrative doesn't have the really rich kind of on the ground look that Liz Waddell's group can provide, but it does really get at those high level goals of the program and fill some gaps that I think are difficult for grantees to do alone.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. I think we've always envisioned this research that we put together as you know, looking at different levels, different types of data, really hand in hand, so we can try to get a more well-rounded view of what the project is doing, what the outcomes are, and then that helps me when I go in front of the legislature and others, you know, in this virtual room who are advocating for the program, to really press legislators on what we're doing.
Is there a way, I mean, also how you use the data to prioritize who you're serving as well? I mean, it'd be nice if almost you have it real time, where you have a frequent utilizer of the jail and the hospital real time. That's who we're gonna prioritize serving. I don't know if there's a vision for that, or.
I think that's always been part of the vision that I've had of where we could get to. I think that was another point that was really hit home in the report that Liz's folks put out, was that oftentimes our grantees are working off of lists that are almost instantly out of date, or sometimes are way too out of date. So yeah, I completely agree. That would be a nice thing to achieve.
Yeah, I think that would be pretty effective.
I guess one last comment that I want to make is I think originally we had hoped to maybe make some decisions today, and by we I mean internal staff on some of the prioritization of some of this funding. I was one of the ones that kind of advocated though for us to wait because obviously today is election day. We're not sure what the next shape of the Oregon State House or the State Senate or the governor's office is going to look like. By February, we will at least have an idea of what the new governor's budget will look like. We'll also know what the makeup of the House and Senate will be, and it will help us a little bit more with our funding legislative strategy. And so I just wanted to mention that, and hopefully we can have some updates for the group as well on what we think that landscape looks like when it comes time for February.
With that in mind, do any other members of the GRC have comments or ideas on how you would like to move forward from today's meeting?
Yeah, this is Greg again. I'd like to see us put the money to work. So, however we're going to prioritize it, whether we're looking at the data resources or some mix of data resources and program capacity that, I have no problem endorsing those priorities that were presented and that were reflected in the discussion. It would just be my preference, I guess, to not be coming back in February and not have moved the ball at all. But I understand that there's more information will be available then, but it takes time to roll this stuff out and put money to work and all that. So that's kicking the can pretty far down the road. I don't know that that's a crisis. It's a small amount of our overall funding, and if we reserve it, I don't think that's the end of the the world. But I do think on the data issue that there are bigger issues at play than just having the resources. If you look at how these projects play out, it's building the partnerships in the beginning, it's defining the cohorts, it's delivering interventions that have an impact on the kinds of outcomes we're looking for, and then having the right partnerships on the end to be able to get at that data, whether it's claims data or arrests or hospitalizations or whatever it is. So it's hard, again, that's why I would like to see proposals for what specific projects could be improved, by that resource. And I also liked what was being talked about with the higher level research as well. So if there's some opportunity there, but I'm still thinking that what we're measuring is impacted by all those things I just mentioned at the end of the day. And in interest of full disclosure, Douglas County has an idea that they would like to use some of those funds for. So, if that were on the table, I'd declare a conflict of interest. But
Thanks, Dr. Brigham. Judge Jonty, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to delaying a decision till February, but what I would like is if staff, I don't know, maybe you could even get together with the Waddell group. If people could start thinking about what it would look like to build up more accountability in the data and go a little bit deeper, and all the things that we've just heard about and what Ms. Beamer had to say, because right now we're talking about the issues, but I don't know enough about all of this to be able to envision what would that look like and what would it take, and is it doable, or is it like a 3-year project that would help me make a decision about where to put the money. So if someone could sketch out like a model of what they think might work that takes in, you know, this evolving feedback that we're getting from the grantees and, you know, keeping our eye on the ball of trying to have accountability in these programs for the purpose and the only purpose. You know, whatever they're doing, I have faith that they're all doing a good job in serving people. I'm not questioning that at all. It's just my goal, and after today's election, maybe my goal is just put in the closet for a while. But my goal is to keep building and, you know, get more money and, you know, embed these ideas in Oregon's response to these problems. So if someone could come up, I don't know, is that like too big of an ask? Is that like coming up with a plan? It's kind of just an outline of a plan, or, you know, so we know what we would be building if we put the money there.
I don't think that's too large of an ask, Judge Shanti. I think similar to what Dr. Brigham was saying, it would be kind of like a proposal of some sorts. We could definitely work with the Waddell Research Group and work with Stephanie and her team at CHSC to see, you know, I'm sure they're researchers too, right? But they probably have a lot of different ideas of what could possibly happen that maybe we're not even considering. So I think it'd be a possibility. I also wanted to give space. I saw Jaren popped up on video. Jaren, wasn't sure if you had a comment. And then I did see Janie mention something in the chat. Janie, if you wanted to speak to that, but we have some other GRC members that we haven't heard from. So Jaren or Janie, if you want to comment, please feel free to do so.
Thanks, Casey. No, I've just been really just trying to take in all the information that was shared today, but then that did pop up and I questioned, oh, should I bring it up or not? So I just thought I'd put it in the chat just to maybe place it on the radar of anyone interested in reading the article. It was a huge list of hospitals. And I just wondered if there was intersection. I know there's, you know, the target population is focused on bookings also, but I think hospital visits too. So just wanted to share.
Hey, thank you, Casey. I'm just taking it all in too. I've been taking a lot of notes, but I don't have anything right now, so thank you.
And, you know, I don't mean to call anyone out, but I saw that, you know, RJ and Jeremiah, and just wanted to give you all space should you have comments. Stacy, you're in that group too.
I'm in favor of asking the grantees what they would use the funds for and then evaluating those requests against the needs that they've identified.
This is Stacy. I would agree with that as well. You know, I have to say the one thing that keeps coming to my mind well, there's two things actually. One is just the intersection of the aid and assist population that we're always hearing about, and how many of these impacts folks are even part of that piece. I'm sure that if Jackson County had any of those dollars, we would see a pretty significant amount of people that are the same. And so I think that that's just an area that we know exists for this population that might be, that is that three-way nexus between all three of the priority points of the impacts grant. So I'd be curious about that. But also, I just think with all of the issues that have come to light around equity and diversity and health equity, and how we know there's a high proportion of diverse populations that are impacted by jail and the criminal system, that I really would support doing some type of a health equity technical assistance training for all of the grantees, so that we really feel like we've given that our best effort, knowing how important that really is and how it's really come to light over the last few years. Those are my comments. And I am fine with waiting because I agree that it'll be interesting to see what the outcomes are.
Thank you, Stacy. Well, Ken, in terms of next steps, I think what could happen is over the next couple of months, we could touch base with both of our research partners, see if they have any grand ideas. We could touch base with our grantees, see if they have any grand ideas as to what those proposals might be, kind of loop back up in February with this group and talk about all of it, and then make a decision at that time. At least then, like Dr. Brigham said, the ball's rolling in the background of, not having to ask folks for proposals at the February meeting. I also, we're not have to come to any decision, but wanted to give space, for public comment and community members to chime in, if that seemed appropriate this time, or Ken, if you wanted to talk about it first before moving on.
No, I mean, I think your plan is a good one. I think that the suggestion that Judge Shanti made, we can do our best to come up with some sort of sketch. I think that, like Dr. Brigham mentioned, reaching out to grantees to see, the main thing I don't want to do is I don't want to make grantees, when we haven't decided what to prioritize, come up with a full application or plan. I think that would be unfair to them if we've not decided exactly where we want to put things. But I think that doing some sort of informal reach out to them to get an idea of what they're proposing, general budget ask. I just don't want to put undue onus on them to build something that then we just maybe move on to something completely different. So I think we can get all those together and be ready in February. And then we'll have a nice menu of options at our disposal.
Are there any members of the public that wanted to weigh in as part of public comment? I also realize we're 5 minutes over the hour, so if people need a jet, please feel free. All right, well, we'll move forward with that, kind of informal proposal requests and move back up in February. And hope you all have happy holidays, and we'll see you in 2023.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for having us. Bye.